bring in Dan Raviv. He's a columnist over at Newsday. He joins me now from Washington. Dan, good to have you on the show. How do you think this this decision by the Kremlin in terms of putting the country's nuclear forces on high alert, the conversations that we're hearing at the Security Council in New York, how's this changing the dynamic? I mean, coming into this, we were all, I was hearing from some analysts saying that, this is Russia's version of the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's looking dangerously like that.
Well, as soon as you use the word nuclear, and Vladimir Putin decided to do that. And just last week, before invading Ukraine, Putin himself was overseeing test firings of missiles that can carry nuclear weapons. So it seems he's trying to frighten someone, I would think Ukraine above all, but he's also trying to frighten NATO. Now, U.S. officials here in Washington have been asked about that repeatedly today. What's the U.S. going to do? Might the U.S. put its nuclear forces on alert? Clearly, President Joe Biden's administration doesn't want to do that. They want to try to ratchet down the pressure, not to add to more tension. And so instead, the word from the White House was this, that Putin has again invented a threat. It's a false threat. NATO isn't threatening Russia. There's no reason to even conceive the use of any nuclear weapon.
Dan, you said that the U.S. is doing everything it can in terms of ratcheting down the tensions. I understand that. China is an interesting player in all this. It's actually trying to get their, perhaps in many ways, adversaries involved in terms of reducing the tensions. We know that China has been sort of, in terms of position, perhaps more sympathetic to some of the Russian causes, but anything to reduce tensions.
Right. What an interesting issue. As seen in Washington, there are two Chinese angles here. One is indications that perhaps President Xi Jinping of China might want to be a mediator at some point, helping to end this crisis, thus making China more popular around the world as a peacemaker. As you know, China is invested in many countries in Europe, and so China would look good, and maybe that would be fine with Putin. But here's the other angle. The United States fears that if Putin appears to succeed in this aggression on Ukraine, then China could be tempted to try to move its military into Taiwan, onto that island, which the U.S. considers so important to the electronics industry and just the cause of freedom. So there's a lot of concern here that nothing should happen that encourages China too much to act on its own somewhere.
When the Russians first crossed the border, the idea was this could be a very fast and swift operation in terms of making comparisons to the Blitzkrieg. 4 days in, we're seeing that it's a much slower advance. It's a more difficult advance. We're seeing sanctions imposed by the West, the United States and Europe. Heavy sanctions that Russia has called illegitimate sanctions as well. Monday, we're expecting a meeting between the two sides for the first time. Talk to us about some of the expectations here.
Well, considering what the Ukrainian President Zelensky said about the Monday talks, that he doesn't have much hope that anything will be resolved, that seems to be the view here in Washington as well. But of course, the U.S. is watching and clearly taking sides. There was a little bit of waiting to see what public opinion might be. And as your correspondent here in Washington said, it now seems clear a vast majority of both Republicans and Democrats want to help Ukraine. The public feels that way. There have been pro-Ukraine demonstrations in big cities like New York, again today, Sunday. And so I think that the Biden administration is going to feel it's the popular thing, the right thing to do, to get weapons to Ukraine. And by the way, it is a bit of a mystery. Can you fly anything into Ukraine when it's besieged by the Russians? Probably not. Maybe they'll move it to Poland, a NATO country, and then somehow truck it into Ukraine. Those are some of the logistic challenges in what's already a difficult political decision.
Dan Raviv, pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for coming on to your World. Do appreciate the analysis.